Hey everyone, Elizabeth Nader back with you. The Nader Narrative on Jersey First TV. What's going on with education in New Jersey? I mean, that is definitely a topic that's in the news almost every day. Think about everything that's happened in the last 2 years with COVID, mandates, school closures, masks, teachers, Zoom, Board of Education, parents getting involved. There is so much that's been happening in the educational space that we really need to focus on it. We need some answers and we need leaders to help guide us to the other side of this. We've got schools that are failing now. We've got test scores that are dropping. We're not used to this in New Jersey. We've always had a strong educational system. So what's going on? What are the reasons? What's behind it? And what are some of the answers? To help us with that, we are bringing on someone who knows this very well and is fighting for common sense in this area in the state, and that is Minority Leader Senator Steve Oroho. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Elizabeth. How you doing? Thank you very much for having me.
I'm doing well, and I'm always happy to have you on because you're wise, you fight, you know what's going on in Trenton, and you speak up for us. So I first want to thank you for that. But specific to this issue, Senator, in August, at the end of August, you wrote sort of an op-ed or a memo, hopefully he got it, to Governor Murphy as he was heading down to DC, of all places, to discuss our teacher shortage in New Jersey. So it brings up the issue, what's going on with our educational system? It seems to be in disarray. How did this happen? How do we fix it? Let's start with looking back a little bit, Senator. How did we get here?
Well, Elizabeth, thank you. And it is, and you have do we have an educational crisis in New Jersey? And we do, because the one thing I think that we are missing is, as you said, looking at the past couple of years with the pandemic and remote learning, and it seems as if, instead of focusing on learning loss and how we, correct for what's been happening for the past 2+ years. Unfortunately, this administration's been focused on, teachers needing to be, we call them, woke or social justice warriors. And, I think most teachers just want to be teaching reading, writing, math, science, history, type of traditional educational kinds of subjects. And unfortunately, they're being put, I believe many teachers feel like they're being put in a very awkward situation against parents who, rightfully so, want to help their children and make sure that their children are being taught traditional subjects. And they, obviously wade into other areas that I'm sure we're going to talk about, but we should be focused on helping our children get those 2 years back.
Yeah. This is true. We've had massive COVID learning loss, and teachers are the good guys here. They really are. The majority of teachers, they pick this path in life because they love to educate. They love children, whatever the reasons are. It's usually a pretty pure choice, and they're caught in the middle. So let's go through a little bit of some of the things that you wrote in your op-ed. You first talked about ending COVID-19 mandates. Now, when you wrote it, we were still looking at masking in Newark, which they dropped on September 12th, or let me say they made it optional. But that continued to be a pressure, and just that environment, Senator, of the masking and the mandates, what did that cause for teachers who are really the front line in needing to enforce this?
Well, as we call them, the COVID-19 police, and it's something that we had said that, Governor Murphy, instead of going down to DC and talking with the education secretary down there, how about letting teachers be teachers and not COVID-19 police? And I'm hopeful that our focus on this issue has influenced the governor and influenced Newark and influenced different areas, because I think without anybody trying to push back, they would have been, I think, happy enough to go along with the way things, quote unquote, were going. And most families don't want to be controversial. They don't. Most families just want to be focused on their day-to-day life. They want to make sure that children are being educated, and and the teachers and parents are being forced into a situation where they see what's happening with the sex ed. They see what's happening with the, COVID-19 mandates. And they said, enough's enough. And quite frankly, we did go through the time when parents saw what was happening in the education, because they became the
Yeah.
teachers, the tutors, and everything for a 2-year period. And it put a lot of stress on a lot of different people.
Yeah, well, I'm going to call that the blessing of COVID. If there ever is a blessing of COVID, it's that parents had a transparency there that was forced upon them. It wasn't given
Yep.
to them, but they saw what was going on, and in many cases were shocked. And this is even before the new sex ed standards, which we're going to talk about. So that's interesting, isn't it? And I do want to count that a win. And thank you for standing up for those children in Newark who didn't really have a voice. And I also agree with you that they dropped that as a result of the pressure. So thank you for doing that. But let's move to this curriculum. Now we need to put this in the context of learning loss, I think, in the last 2 years. And the reason why is we've forgotten, it seems, that we need to focus on the basics, right? Which is reading, writing, arithmetic, true history, etc. And instead, during COVID, as the audience probably knows by now, in June of 2020, the state board came up with a new set of what they call a health curriculum. It's really a sexual education curriculum. And Senator, all of a sudden now that is being forced on the schools. Talk a little bit about where that came from and the damage it's doing.
Well, where it came from, and Elizabeth, you mentioned June of 2020. Now think back about then, right? March of 2020 was when this quote unquote pandemic had started. So everybody in that period of time was very concerned about, what this new virus was, how long it was going to take, what kind of effect it was going to have. So during that time, when people were not concentrating, quote unquote, on the what the new curriculum standards are going to be, they passed. And I'm glad to say my good friend Andy Mulvihill was one of the ones that voted against the new standards, and saying that this is completely inappropriate. And the standards what we're talking about, right, is this gender identity by like the second grade, being able to tell, if you're, a male or a female, or how do you feel about that, type of things. In the 5th grade, they talk of examples about masturbation and whatnot. And then in the 8th grade, the specifically say, be able to define. Now we're talking about 8th grade, define vaginal, anal, and oral sex. And, Reed and I are, 5 children. They're all grown. We just had our 9th grandchild. We're expecting our 10th grandchild in December. And I know as a grandfather and as a parent, these are not things that I would have want, my children learning, or the schools, quote unquote, mandating, even though they say, oh, they're not mandates. I beg to differ. But these are not subjects that, I want my children talking about. I want them, those are, as we've said, kitchen table. Those are home discussions. And they said, well, parents can opt out. And I've said over and over again, they have not been forthright with these parents, letting them know, because it came in under the, the cloak of the beginning of the pandemic. And as parents are finding out, more and more as parents are finding out, they're saying they don't want this.
Yeah. Absolutely. And you bring up a point about the opt-out, which I think people need to look a little bit harder at that. One of the things we've noticed when you really look at the curriculum is it isn't in a silo necessarily. And in fact, as time goes on, we're seeing things like CRT and social educational learning and these other concepts being woven into traditional subjects. So opt-out is almost to the point of impossible. And I would also argue, wouldn't you, Senator, that why would we want to put a target on the kids whose parents said, you're not going to be in that class, right? To separate and segregate them. I know some towns have been trying an opt-in, and I have to applaud some of these Board of Educations who have been pushing back against this. Do you think, look into your crystal ball, do you think we will be successful in pushing back? Where do you think the governor is going to go with this, or is he going to die on this hill?
I think the governor is going to continue to push this because I think it came from their administration. I think many elected officials, school board members as well, unfortunately, have been put in a very bad position don't really have understood that what is in the standards. And I think the governor's going to continue to push. But the key thing is, and it's not just the legislature, and Elizabeth, having shows like this and having people speaking out, and because the media, most media has not been, very forthright on this on the subjects that are being taught. So the more parents to get involved, the more parents to hear, in a very respectful way, say that this is not what we want. This is, and we push forward the opt-in, right? Now the opt-out is something. The opt-out is, you can only opt out when you're informed about what it is, right? They haven't been forthright as to what it is. I had a radio interview, and I said to them, I said, are you going to say they have to be able to define, and there's no ambiguity about what define means, right? Oral, vaginal, and anal sex. And the radio host said to me, we can't say that, Senator. I said, well, why not? He says, well, we're a family show. I said, we're talking about elementary school. Oh. And he said, oh, good point. So he said, at least if you have an opt-in, a parent has to take a proactive step to see that, okay, this is something, which then means they may ask more questions about, hey, what is it that I'm opting into? Yeah. Right? So I think that, now, quite frankly, we've had the 3 R's, just repeal, replace, and restore, Right. But let's start all over again. Why don't we focus on what's really critically important right now, and that's the learning loss that we know has happened. Yeah. We know parents want traditional education in schools. We know that teachers want to teach. A math teacher doesn't have to be talking about these, kind of woke kind of policies when we're trying to teach algebra.
Yeah, right? It's I mean, woke math is a thing now, Senator. We're going to do a show on woke math. Who would have ever thought? So the state board got it wrong. Obviously a lot of us believe there's a bigger agenda there. That's not hard to see. Speaking of agendas, elephant in the corner, the NJEA. Now, mm-hmm. This is maybe an organization that parents 2 years ago didn't think much about. And once again, a side effect of COVID is that they are sort of involved in a lot of the pushing the mandates and things like that. But recently, making a few moves, frankly, hostile to parents. You saw the ad coming out calling parents extremists, also hosting educational topics. And this one is called, let me read this, Teaching is Political, Advocating and Organizing for Social Change. Okay, what's going on with the NJEA and what do we do about it?
That's one, and I hope their members start to see what they're using their dues that they pay, because they pay a significant amount of dues. Obviously, the executive officers get significantly, high compensation. They do obviously a lot of political, giving to, different organizations. And just as you said right there, they say right there that, teaching is political, advocating for and organizing for social change. That's right there telling you what they want to have done. And I really do think, Elizabeth, as you said, most teachers do not want that. Most teachers got into this not even really thinking about any kind of political agendas. They got into thinking they wanted to help children. They wanted to help families. And I think that's what we got to get back to. And I've said many times, listen, the only thing that we really need to teach in schools about, is something like the golden rule. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as God has loved you, type of thing. I firmly believe that, very much so. And I really do think most students, when they get into class, they want to respect their listen. Every kid's going to have something going on. I was 4 brothers and a sister growing up. We would have our differences, right, for sure sometimes. Right. But at the same time, most of them, they want to go in, they want to learn subjects. Their parents want them to learn subjects. Right. Reading, writing, math, true history, like you said, science, and quite frankly, and after these couple of years, what would be more important than just going back to traditional learning and forget all the other stuff?
Yeah, this timing couldn't be worse. It's wrong anyway, but the timing couldn't be worse. Let's move
And
to
the teachers, and I think you're
yeah,
100% right. I think most teachers, they focus on what's going on in their classroom with their students. They're not really thinking about that, but they're being forced to do this. I
yes.
really do believe that.
Right. I agree with you. We need to stand up for them as well and
Mhm.
let them know there's an alternative to the NJEA. Really, they don't have to go that direction, but we also need to defend them.
Yes.
So, a fourth point of your op ed really is the financial aspect of this. And this is a big part of it. Let's talk a little bit about the budget and what happened to you, say, about 200 school systems that lost aid. So, how
Yeah.
is that affecting everything?
Well, certainly. Well, the whole we talked about that in a realm of teacher shortages, but you had 200 school districts, probably 200 school districts who actually got aid cut, and the administration has said, and a number of elected officials keep saying, we have the historic amount of K to 12 education in the budget. When you have a third of your school districts that are being cut, particularly at a time when the state was flush with cash, and every school district is dealing with this issue of learning loss, is dealing with getting back to regular in classroom, educational, offerings. It's to have a significant amount of money taken from you, and is makes it extremely difficult. And we have been very vocal about the fact that they call this fair school funding formula. It's a completely unfair school funding formula. It's completely very complicated, and we've called for an overhaul of the school funding formula and treat every child equally.
Yeah. Well, I need to ask you something that seems it's going to be a bigger and bigger issue as a result of everything that's happened, what we've listed today, what we've seen in COVID, where things are going. School choice. School choice
Mhm.
has not really been something we've been able to push much in New Jersey. It's limited. We see a lot of attrition from the public schools now. We see people homeschooling. We see schools, pod schools. What's happened in Arizona. They've had massive changes from a legislative standpoint as it relates to school choice and the dollars following the student. Do you have any sense that we could get some movement there in New Jersey?
Well, I'm 100% school choice. I've been behind school choice, and I would certainly hope so. And I think hopefully as parents continue to uh, get involved and know that hopefully that they see that they're having some influence, having parental choice for where their child goes to school and have the money follow the child, to me is critically important. Because you look at competition. Competition helps. We look at the technology we're using today. And as you said before, one of the good things that may have come out because of the pandemic is that people had to show that they could use technology and use it, very, very well. And it's going to continue to get better and better. And just the kind of offerings that gives for educational opportunities as well. But I've been for 100% school choice. I believe it. I believe not only for the student, but I also believe for the teachers to give them a few additional alternative marketplaces to go to. When you have more marketplace to go to, your profession rises. It does. It rises, and so therefore, I think they would be more apt to be treated as true professionals that they wanted to be when they first started their career.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. So, another potential bright side of all of this is perhaps we will now have more of a platform to talk about freedom and education and choices.
I certainly hope so. And I think, Elizabeth, as you mentioned Arizona, but also in states, I think like Indiana and whatnot, there's been a lot of more states have been picking up the idea that school choice has helped their children and their
Yes.
families. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll do another show on that, Senator,
okay.
and hope that becomes an important issue for everyone to focus on. Thank you so much. I know this was a quick hit, but we appreciate, first of all, the fact that you're fighting and speaking out and hoping the governor hears you, but continue to fight for us in Trenton, Senator. We appreciate
We'll do.
everything you're doing, and I know the families do as well. We'll have you back soon.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Take
All
care.
right.
Bye bye.
Thank you. And to my audience, we'll see you next week.